On the West Block this week, Canada's pitch for a seat on the UN Security Council.
It is a means to continue important dialogue in support of multilateralism.
We are a leader in the world. The world is expecting us to take some leadership role, and this is an important one.
Then disturbing reports about long-term care homes.
We were looking at fixing a system that had been neglected and ignored for decades.
There's more emphasis on the bottom line than care for seniors.
Plus, the race to lead the Conservative Party.
So the McKay campaign is out of gas.
And we continue to build the support that we need, in my view, to win this contest.
In just over 2 weeks, we'll find out if the government's campaign to win a seat at the United Nations Security Council is successful. Canada is competing against Ireland and Norway for one of 2 openings at the council. For weeks, the Prime Minister has been making calls to fellow global leaders looking to rally support for Canada's bid. But why is this seat such a priority for the government? Joining me now is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Marc-André Blanchard. Your first time on the program. Welcome, sir.
I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for the invitation, really.
Well, we are so interested to talk to you about what is happening for Canada at the United Nations right now. It's a very exciting time, a very high-pressure time. But I have to ask you the question that we hear from so many Canadians. They look at the United Nations and say, look, this is an organization that wasn't able to intervene in Syria. They're deadlocked because of Russia and China on the Security Council. All this time, all this money, why should Canada want a seat on the Security Council?
Well, we see that it's true that there are some conflicts where the UN is not as efficient as we would like it to be. But then there's a lot of conflicts where the UN every day does its job. Just to take like there's probably 15 conflicts around the world where you have more than 100,000 peacekeepers tonight when we all go to sleep that are taking care of that. And that's the work of the UN. And like humanitarian assistance in this crisis of pandemic, the biggest player in the world is the United Nations. So yes, there are some difficulties and some challenges at the UN, but there's some very good sides of the UN. You know, there was a Secretary General who said, you know, the UN was not created to take the world to heaven, but it was created to ensure that we wouldn't go to hell. And so it was. So this is really. I say to the people who criticize the UN is not perfect. I agree with you. We wanted to make it better. And on the other hand, it's a huge opportunity for Canadians because when you're around that table, you are more relevant. And when you are more relevant, you have more influence in the world. And when you have more influence in the world, that means more opportunities for Canadians in Canada, but also abroad. So this is why it's important for Canadians. And I actually believe it's being a good citizen of the world, but it's also in our own interest as Canadians.
So I know part of what you're always doing when you're vying for a seat like this is counting. How many votes do you have from other countries? And I know you're unlikely to reveal that to us on the program, but what's your sense of Canada's chance here? Because we are up against 2 countries that contribute far more in terms of international aid and peacekeeping. They're well liked. That's Norway and Ireland. So what do you think our chances are?
Ireland and Norway are very good countries. They're very well-liked countries around the world, and so is Canada. Canada is a great country. Canada brings so much to the world. Really, it sounds corny, but I always say that I have the best job in the world because I represent the best country in the world. But put that aside, the issue that you raise about peacekeeping and aid, it's also about the impact that the country has. And Canada has a lot of impact. Just think about the leadership of Prime Minister Trudeau when he reunited Thursday of this week 52 world leaders to actually discuss the financial consequences of the pandemic. We were actually working with Jamaica as part of the co-host with the Secretary General. And within a week, 53 leaders from the world answered our invitation and said, yes, we want to be part of that discussion. That's what Canada does best. It convenes, it puts issues on the table, and we are trying to bridge the issues. That's has always been the role of Canada in history, and that's when we were at our best, and that's what we want to contribute on the Security Council, but also on these cases of the COVID-19 recovery. You know, we're facing the worst humanitarian crisis in the history, but since the last 100th century, but also the worst economic crisis in the last 100 years, sorry, not centuries. Years.
Ambassador, does that mean that we are committing to putting more money into COVID-19 for these other countries around the world through the UN? Are we committing to more peacekeepers? Are we committing to more international aid? It's one thing to say Canada's a great country and we should be at the table, but at the end of the day, are we putting our money where our mouth is?
Well, we're certainly, this is not about only, it was interesting in the event that the Prime Minister Trudeau actually convened. It was mentioned by many leaders, and many leaders from the private sectors, many leaders from the World Bank and the IMF and other world leaders, that this is actually not only about public resources, but it's about actually leveraging and making sure that we canalize more private sector money at the right place in a more sustainable way. So this is, you need to do things differently with this crisis. This is not the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. This is a different crisis. This is a crisis that is about life and livelihood. And we will need different answers. Yes, there's a part where the public sector needs to do its share of the work, but also the private sector and all of us, the private citizen. And that was the interesting point, and that came out in that discussion led by Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Olnos from Jamaica. And
Ambassador, I'm sorry to jump in, but we just have a few moments left, and I do want to ask you about the effect of Canada's dispute with China over Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. What effect is that having on your bid? Because the Chinese are incredibly influential at the United Nations. They pay for the roads and wells in Africa. Africa is the biggest voting bloc. So I'm curious to know if you think that that is potentially damaging it, or are people sympathetic towards Canada and more likely to vote for us because of that?
Well, you know, there's 193 reasons why the countries will vote or not vote for Canada when will come the elections for the Security Council. And it's different reason. It's a lot about many different things. And for the 193 countries that will vote, they will have 193 different reasons, whether they will look at our foreign policy, the bilateral relationship that we have, the influence that we have in the region, our focus on some aspects of policy that they particularly appreciate. So it's not only one issue. Of course, all issues have to a certain degree of an impact. But I think in this case, in the case of the vote on this, it's actually, Canada is in a good position. I think but we will never know until all the votes are cast. It's a very, very contested election. It's always like that.
All right, Ambassador, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck in your campaign.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and we'll work as hard as we can, because I think Canadians have a big role to play. Thank you.
Up next, abuse, neglect, and more. A new report that highlights disturbing problems at long-term care homes. After decades of people raising the alarm, how can we change the system to care for our elderly with dignity and care?